I'm not going to kill you. I want you to do me a favor. I want you to tell all your friends about me. What are you? I'm Batman.
Being the world's first anti-hero making his debut in 1939, Batman has had plenty of forays onto the big screen, and it doesn't look like he's going away anytime soon. So with the announcement of a new Batman film on the way in 2021, I thought it best to briefly go over every theatrical Batman movie and observe the evolution of the dynamic crime fighter over the ages. Our journey begins in the 1940s with two film serials released by Columbia Pictures, the first in 1943 simply called Batman, and the second in 1949 under the title The New Adventures of Batman and Robin, the Boy Wonder, or just simply Batman and Robin. Both encompass the concept of Batman up to that point, meaning this was a Batman that wasn't afraid to kill if necessary, and focused more on the forensic side of crime fighting. They both had issues with costumes, plot holes, and outright forgetting logic at times. However, they do have their own distinct qualities worth mentioning. The first serial was released at the height of World War II, and more specifically, America's war with Japan. And this film is not afraid to flaunt it. The 1943 Batman is riddled with anti-Japanese propaganda and represents the key role superheroes played in said propaganda. The 1949 serial, on the other hand, represents post-war America, and in my opinion, the waning interest the public had in superheroes. After World War II and having no real-life enemies to fight against, there was no propaganda needed to include the big screen hero. Batman and Robin are fighting basically the same villain, but this time instead of a Japanese spy to defeat, it's some goofball in a mask. As a result, popularity and demand of more Batman died down, and the world wouldn't receive the next project until around 17 years later, this time with Adam West under the cowl. In 1966, the first ever feature-length Batman film was released by 20th Century Fox. The 60s Batman television series, infamous for its outlandish campiness, had just aired its first season earlier that year, and released the movie to cinemas in the summer to capitalize on the success of the popular new hit series. The film itself encompasses all the zaniness of the show and adds its own crazy into the mix with iconic scenes, including the shark repellent and famous quotes such as,
"Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb."
The film probably wouldn't win over modern audiences due to the lack of a dark and brooding lead character, but genuinely gets laughs out of me because of how straight Adam West and Burt Ward play their characters when they're dealing with wild situations. It's undoubtedly a product of the times, seeing as how many other superheroes were being molded to engage a more, let's say, peaceful audience. But as time went on and the memory of the film had passed and the show was canceled in 1968, Batman would again fall to the wayside for nearly another 20 years. That is, until a Mr. Tim Burton would try his hand in the directing chair. In 1986, writer Frank Miller released one of the biggest and most ambitious comic books up to that point, The Dark Knight Returns. This was a radically different approach to the caped crime fighter up to that point in time. With the idea of campy Batman still looming around, Miller's darker take resonated with widespread audiences, so much so that Warner Brothers picked up the rights to the character and brought on rising director Tim Burton, who had just scored big with Beetlejuice in 1988. The hunt for who would play the title role was a hard and arduous journey. Burton passed up several talented candidates, including Alec Baldwin, Mel Gibson, and even Pierce Brosnan. However, all of them were forgotten in favor of comedy actor Michael Keaton, who played the character of Beetlejuice. When this was announced, over 50,000 protest letters were sent in, and even Batman creator Bob Kane objected to the casting decision. Despite the naysayers, though, Keaton would go on to become one of the best portrayals of the Dark Knight, and in my own personal opinion, the best.
I'm Batman.
The film marked the point in time where Batman movies and Batman in general could appeal to adults with its sleek, edgy, and cunning style. And with the success of the 1989 classic, Warner Brothers would give Burton another chance to make movie magic with a sequel. But this time around, things didn't go quite as they had planned. In 1992, America saw the release of Burton and Keaton's second outing in the Batman universe. With this project, Burton had almost sole control and say over the operation thanks to the success of his first film. But this newfound freedom would come at a price the producers weren't expecting. See, Tim Burton is kind of dark and twisted, and he always tries to get his movies to reflect that, and in Batman Returns, it's very much front and center and in your face. This time you have people being caught on fire, women in skin-tight leather, and Danny DeVito biting someone's nose till it's a bloody mess. While there were dark moments in the original film, it wasn't as prevalent and was maintained and sanctioned by higher-ups in case something went too far. This time, it was so blatant that a huge group of parents got so mad and raised so much hell, Warner Brothers was practically forced to boot Tim Burton off the Batman team, and with him, Keaton went as well. The movie was still successful enough to warrant a sequel, but there was no director or lead actor. This is when the Batman movies of the 80s and 90s would be split between two distinct eras, the Tim Burton era and the Joel Schumacher era. But going on during the Tim Burton controversy, Batman was making even more headlines, but this time in the animated department. Riding on the success of Batman and Batman Returns, Warner Brothers opened up to its animation division on making a new Batman cartoon inspired by the same dark themes in those movies. The success of the show would lead Warner Brothers to demand a feature film be made, and in 1993 we received the first ever theatrical animated Batman movie. The only problem was that the parent studio did an awful job advertising the movie, and because of that it failed miserably at the box office, only making back just a little over 1/6 of its original budget in the opening weekend. Fortunately, despite its initial lack of success, critics praised the film for its style, music, and perfect animation. Even famous film critics Siskel and Ebert loved it. It also found plenty of success in the home video department, resulting in 2 direct-to-home video sequels. But while Batman's movies struggled in the cartoon department, his live-action films were still making loads of money. Previously a set designer, Joel Schumacher would be hired on to not only take over Batman, but take into account all the complaints the studio received from Batman Returns and work to play down the darker themes. This resulted in Batman Forever in 1995, starring Val Kilmer, and Batman and Robin in 1997, starring George Clooney. Both films drew inspiration from the 60s Batman due to its ability to infect a wider audience under its guise of campiness. Said campiness would be implored into the style of both movies, and the result was a welcomed response of reprieve from parents and young children, but would ultimately be shredded apart by critics, especially the later of the duo, Batman and Robin, receiving the most hate across time. The movies focused too much on the campiness and the selling of toys that they left out actual funny jokes or any semblance of a compelling story. This drove Warner Brothers to pull the plug on Batman and keep him locked away for fear he may be used to ill effect yet again. Several years later, Warner Brothers would approach skilled writer and director Christopher Nolan to see if he could make Batman great again. Nolan teamed up with writer David S. Goyer, who was famous for his work on the Blade movies, and the two set about composing a story that would focus more on challenging the audience emotionally and intellectually. In 2005, Batman Begins, starring Christian Bale, would be greeted with overwhelming praise and gratitude. The amount of love and praise the movie received, while being a good film, was most likely due to its stark contrast from the previous entry, Batman and Robin. The Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy would become famous for its gritty and realistic take on the Batman mythos. That fame would become cemented thanks to its sequel, The Dark Knight, arguably the best film in the trilogy. The film and its acting would become the stuff of legends in modern film, giving us what is considered by many the pinnacle of live-action Joker performances. Heath Ledger, who tragically died during the making of the movie, won an Oscar for his chilling performance as the maniacal clown Prince of Crime. And in 2012, Nolan finished out his acclaimed trilogy with The Dark Knight Rises. While it didn't receive as much praise as its predecessor, which, come on, who could live up to that? It still managed to deliver a decent overall flick. This whole trilogy is what makes up the modern concept of Batman, that he is a deep and twisted character that does dark things and pushes the boundaries of what he can morally get away with. This concept would cement Batman as both a very adult superhero and spread his influence to not just kids anymore. However, with subsequent adaptations of the Batman character, one thing people, Zack Snyder, forget is that Batman isn't just dark and gritty. He has to have interesting motivation and drive that engages the audience to be on his side. Otherwise, you have Batman v Superman. In 2016, Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice hit theaters to a resounding meh. Most critics abhorred it, and most audiences were mixed. However, often stated to be one of the only shining lights in the film was Ben Affleck as Batman. Much like with Michael Keaton, there was a fiery decline by fans to have him on board, but as time went on, he did show promise, and in the final cut, it's really up to opinion if you think he did okay. On the one hand, he's a talented actor, and during the film you can see a good performance trying to make its way through, but on the other hand, the writing is so humorless, dull, and incoherent that it's hard to get invested in him or believe in his motivations. This critical train wreck stemmed from the fact that DC and Warner Brothers tried to compete with Marvel and Disney, who had already been on top of their game since 2008 with the original Iron Man. This being only the second film in what was supposed to be a shared cinematic universe, suffered from an overpopulation of plots and foreshadowing that ultimately drowned out Ben Affleck's role. This trend of botching the DCEU would extend into the follow-up film, which also included a cameo from Ben Affleck's Batman, Suicide Squad. With DC's constant overuse of the dark and dreary, it began to give them the reputation for being the edgelords of the film community, with even pointless undertones seeping into their actually successful films, like Wonder Woman. In order to combat this stigma and lack of theatrical success, Warner Animation Group opted to produce a funny, charming, and lighthearted superhero flick, and chose their most famous, gritty, gothic crime fighter to be in it. In 2017, a spin-off from the highly successful Lego Movie captivated audiences of all ages. The Lego Batman Movie, starring Will Arnett, showed the world that Batman didn't need to be dark, brooding, and humorless to be engaging and smart. Director Chris McKay and writer Seth Grahame-Smith took all the right pages out of the other successful Batman stories, such as Adam West's Batman and Michael Keaton's Batman, and forged a memorable movie of their own. This film has such an important position in this modern era because it stands to show that we all need to relax and not take a guy dressed in a bat costume too seriously. The concepts found in Lego Batman would unfortunately not carry over to the next film in the legacy of The Dark Knight, which was Justice League in 2017. It seemed doomed from the start, not just because of the lackluster universe established beforehand, but also because it seemed that audiences had caught on to Warner Brothers and concluded this film that had been set up so poorly would prove to be one of the worst in the filmography of DC.
You're despicable.
And everyone was right. Sadly, unlike Batman v Superman, Ben Affleck, who makes his final appearance as the Caped Crusader here, is not the saving grace this time around. His character is suffocated by the numerous subplots and other characters that need establishing. While Batman is one of the characters that gets the ball rolling in the story, he ultimately shows that he's even more underwritten and underdeveloped in this film than he ever had before in the DCEU. And it's too bad we'll never get to see Ben Affleck actually get the chance to portray the Bat properly in a standalone movie and prove if he could do it under competent writing. Because of the failure of the cinematic universe, Ben Affleck left the Batman project Warner Brothers had previously revealed they were working on, first as the director, then left altogether when he dropped out of the lead role. This mysterious Batman movie had been stuck in limbo for a while as fans eagerly awaited who would be cast as the Gothic Guardian. Eventually it came down to Nicholas Hoult of X-Men fame and Robert Pattinson, most famous for his role as Edward Cullen in the Twilight Saga. The decision happened fast and Pattinson became the leading man in The Batman, which has been scheduled for 2021. The choice was controversial to say the least. Petitions began popping up everywhere online calling for Pattinson to be fired and replaced. However, it looks like director Matt Reeves is sticking to his guns and going with the shiny guy. If you'll take notice, this is starting to sound a lot like what happened with Michael Keaton. Hopefully a lot of people out there have taken the position that it's not that Robert Pattinson is a bad actor, it's just that he doesn't entirely seem to fit the bill. But keep in mind, fans didn't want Keaton either for the same reason. They called for him to be replaced, and even the Batman creator didn't like the look of him. But he turned out to be one of the best. Whether or not Pattinson will be able to pull it off is entirely up to him now. And we'll just have to see when the movie comes out in 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Don't forget to leave a like if you dug it, or a dislike if you didn't. Make sure you put a comment down below and let me know what your favorite Batman movie is and why. I'm Garrett at RUNAMUCK Films, and I will catch you guys later.
You wouldn't get a lady, would you?
The hammer of justice is unisex.